What if I told you that the king of rock and roll never actually left the building? For over 4 decades, millions of fans worldwide have refused to accept that Elvis Presley died on August 16, 1977. From mysterious sightings to unexplained coincidences, the evidence keeps piling up like records in Sun Studio. Today we're diving deep into 5 absolutely mind-blowing facts that will make you question everything you thought you knew about that fateful day in Memphis. These aren't just random conspiracy theories. These are documented anomalies that even the most skeptical investigators can't explain away. Buckle up, because what you're about to discover will rock your world harder than Elvis rocked Ed Sullivan's stage back in 1956. The setup, a legend's final curtain call. The story begins on a sweltering August morning in Memphis in the year 1977 when the world was told it had lost its most iconic entertainer. Elvis Aaron Presley, known everywhere as the King, was announced dead. Yet when the surface of that story is scratched, the details grow murkier and far more intriguing. Elvis was not simply a celebrity burdened by fame. By the summer of 1977, he was a man cornered by pressures on every side, living in a golden cage and suffocating under the weight of his own legend. The demands pressing against him were immense. His longtime manager, Colonel Tom Parker, was entangled in gambling debts so deep that his survival depended entirely on Elvis remaining on stage and on the road. Federal investigators had compiled files on Presley stretching back decades, monitoring his movements and associations. At the same time, death threats against him were no longer idle threats, but increasingly credible dangers. The life of the most famous man in America was also one of constant surveillance and suspicion. And still, Elvis was only 42 years of age. At that point, he stood at the highest peak of his earning power. Every show sold out with ease, and tours were booked well into the future. His financial empire was thriving. Far from being a fading star, he was still one of the most powerful figures in popular culture. It leaves behind a strange contradiction. With every reason to live, could he also have possessed every means to step away from the stage forever? The timing of his supposed death feeds this uncertainty. His marriage to Priscilla Presley had ended, and the divorce was finalized. Many of the legal ties that could have restricted his freedom were now severed. His daughter Lisa Marie was still a child, young enough to be relocated without creating an insurmountable public disruption. Most importantly, Elvis had been speaking openly about the suffocating nature of his fame and his yearning to retreat from it all. He longed to step out of the spotlight and live not as a king but as a man. The official account claims Elvis died alone in the bathroom of Graceland, discovered by his girlfriend Ginger Alden. Yet this story begins to crumble when examined closely. Paramedics at the scene reported inconsistencies in the timeline. The condition of the body did not match the time of death that was first announced. Surveillance footage from that day vanished. Phone calls were placed from Graceland after Elvis was supposedly gone. These are not small details, but major contradictions that no investigation has ever fully resolved. Then there was the man himself. Elvis was deeply fascinated by law enforcement and undercover operations. He collected police badges the way others collect stamps. He disguised himself often and traveled under assumed names. He studied deception with almost obsessive interest. The same man who gave the world love songs and spectacle also understood how to disappear when he wished. The unsettling question remains: did Elvis Presley truly die that hot August morning? Or did he craft his final and greatest performance by vanishing into the shadows of his own legend? Fact 1. The misspelled gravestone mystery. Here is where the first mind-blowing fact enters the story, and it has been hiding in plain sight within the meditation garden at Graceland. Visitors who walk up to the grave marker said to belong to Elvis Presley are immediately struck by a detail that has puzzled fans, historians, and investigators for decades. The name carved into the granite reads Elvis Aaron Presley. Yet his true middle name, as recorded on his birth certificate, was spelled Aaron without the extra letter. This was not a casual mistake, and it was not an innocent oversight. It appears instead to have been a deliberate decision designed to send a very particular message to anyone who knew how to read between the lines. The significance of this small but powerful alteration becomes clearer when one recalls the story of Jesse Garon Presley, Elvis's twin brother who tragically died at birth. Throughout his life, Elvis often expressed a deep sense of incompleteness, as though part of himself had always been missing. Family records reveal that Jesse's intended middle name was Aaron with the double-letter spelling. To carve the gravestone at Graceland with the name Aaron rather than Aaron may have been no accident at all. It suggested to the observant eye that the marker symbolized Jesse rather than Elvis. For those inclined to search for hidden clues, the symbolism was unmistakable. The timeline of the grave marker's appearance only deepens the mystery. The stone was not installed immediately after Presley's supposed death in 1977. Instead, years passed before a permanent marker was finally put in place. During that time, visitors to Graceland were told that a special design was in progress, crafted with great care. That long delay provided ample opportunity for decisions to be reconsidered and for symbolic messages to be encoded into the final monument. When the gravestone finally appeared, the family insisted that Aaron had been chosen because Elvis had legally altered the spelling of his name. Yet no official legal documentation has ever surfaced to verify this claim, leaving the explanation unsupported and suspicious. Accounts from former Graceland employees add another layer of intrigue. Security personnel reported motion detectors being activated at strange hours without any visible cause. Surveillance cameras aimed at the meditation garden were prone to unexplained malfunctions, often recording nothing when triggered. Groundskeepers described fresh flowers materializing overnight, carefully placed by someone who appeared to have secret access to the property long after visiting hours had ended. These were not isolated events, but a repeating pattern that persisted for years, feeding the notion that something unusual surrounded the supposed resting place. The broader context makes the situation even more compelling. When other legendary cultural figures of the same era passed away, their burial sites instantly became shrines, drawing massive crowds of grieving admirers. In contrast, access to Presley's grave was far more restricted. Visitors described the atmosphere as tightly controlled, more defensive than celebratory. The heavy security did not feel like a measure to manage large crowds. Instead, it resembled a barrier erected to guard a secret. The question becomes unavoidable. Was the gravestone in the meditation garden truly intended to honor the memory of Elvis Presley? Or was it a silent signal pointing to a truth too explosive for the world to accept? Fact 2. The suspicious death certificate anomalies. The second bombshell fact revolves around Elvis Presley's death certificate, a document so riddled with irregularities that it reads more like a rough draft than an official record. Dr. Jerry Francisco, the medical examiner who signed off on the paperwork, later admitted that he never conducted a thorough examination of Elvis's body. Instead, he relied primarily on the scene and on statements from those present. For a death of such magnitude and international attention, this represents a shocking break from standard medical examiner protocol. The official cause of death was listed as cardiac arrhythmia. The phrase sounded medically credible to the public while remaining vague enough to avoid scrutiny. Yet the eyewitness reports from that morning do not line up with a typical cardiac arrest scenario. Ginger Alden, Elvis's girlfriend, stated that she discovered him face down in the bathroom. In most cases of sudden cardiac arrest, however, victims collapse immediately wherever they happen to be, often without the ability to move. Elvis's positioning suggested he had walked deliberately to a private space, almost as though he was preparing for what was to come. Even more troubling are the discrepancies in temperature readings taken when paramedics arrived. The body's core temperature indicated that death had occurred significantly earlier than the reported timeline. Witnesses insisted they had seen Elvis alive only hours before, yet the scientific data told a very different story. The attending paramedics noted these inconsistencies in their reports, but their observations were quickly brushed aside and excluded from the official investigation. Perhaps the most damning anomaly involves Elvis's medical records from Baptist Memorial Hospital. Within days of his supposed passing, the hospital's complete file on Presley vanished. These records covered years of treatment and were far too extensive to be lost by accident. Hospital administrators claimed that the files had been transferred to the family, but the Presley estate has never made them public. Their disappearance left an enormous gap in the medical history of one of the most closely monitored entertainers on Earth. The death certificate itself raises additional questions. Most high-profile deaths result in paperwork being completed immediately, partly due to legal requirements and partly due to intense media scrutiny. In Elvis's case, the certificate was not filed until several days after his death. When it was finally submitted, it contained errors and later required corrections and amendments that were added weeks afterward. This unusual delay created time for the narrative to be coordinated and adjusted before being locked into the record. Blood work and toxicology reports are typically mandatory in sudden high-profile deaths. In this case, results were either never performed or never released to the public. The few toxicology findings that did surface revealed elevated prescription drug levels. However, experts pointed out that these amounts were not automatically fatal, especially for someone like Elvis who had developed a significant tolerance after years of prescribed medications. Taken together, the irregularities in the death certificate, the vanished medical records, the inconsistent physical evidence, and the vague official explanations create a portrait of an event that was managed rather than investigated. Fact 3. The witness protection connection. The third earth-shattering fact centers on Elvis Presley's deep and long-running connections with federal law enforcement agencies, ties far more extensive than most people ever realized. By the middle of the 1970s, Elvis was quietly serving as an unofficial informant for the Drug Enforcement Administration. His unrivaled access to the entertainment industry's underground drug networks made him a valuable asset to investigators. At the same time, that cooperation placed him squarely in the crosshairs of the very criminals he was helping to expose. Documents later released by the Federal Bureau of Investigation through the Freedom of Information Act revealed that Presley had received multiple death threats from organized crime figures. These warnings were not empty gestures of intimidation. They came from men with both the means and the will to carry out violent retaliation. The Bureau considered the danger credible enough that it recommended Presley adopt protective measures. Among the options discussed was the possibility of relocation under the Federal Witness Protection Program, an extraordinary measure but one well within the government's reach. What strengthens this theory is Elvis's genuine passion for law enforcement. Collecting police badges was not simply a hobby to amuse himself. Presley was genuinely fascinated by investigative methods and undercover strategy. He had studied police procedure, practiced techniques to spot surveillance, and even held long discussions about the logistics of disappearing into a new identity. He approached these interests not as playful distractions, but with the same energy and determination he once devoted to music and performance. The most troubling detail is the timing. Elvis's supposed death in 1977 coincided almost perfectly with a sweeping federal probe into organized crime's infiltration of the music and film industries. Presley was in a unique position to provide testimony that could have dismantled several powerful crime families. His sudden death removed a key witness, and as a result, multiple high-profile cases collapsed for lack of evidence. The convenience of this turn of events has never been properly explained by authorities. Adding to the intrigue are statements from former federal agents who had worked directly with Elvis during this period. Some of these men have gone on record declaring their belief that the official story of Presley's death was staged. These individuals were not obsessed fans or wild conspiracy theorists. They were seasoned professionals who recognized the fingerprints of witness protection protocol. They pointed to specific measures taken in the days before and after the announced death. measures identical to those used when relocating protected witnesses. By 1977, the Federal Witness Protection Program had already succeeded in relocating dozens of high-profile figures who had testified against organized crime. The system had the money, the expertise, and the legal reach to construct new identities and erase old ones. In that context, Presley's situation was unusual only because of his fame, not because of the logistical requirements. If federal authorities had chosen to protect him, they possessed every tool necessary to stage a convincing death and move him into an entirely new life. The Graceland years, setting the stage. To understand how the greatest disappearing act in entertainment history could have been carried out, we must look carefully at the years leading up to that August morning in 1977. Graceland was not merely the home of Elvis Presley, it was his stronghold, a self-contained estate fortified with security systems that rivaled those used by government agencies. Its physical isolation and controlled access created the ideal conditions for planning and executing a complex operation without interference from the outside world. In his final years, Elvis grew increasingly reclusive. He reduced his public appearances and carefully controlled who was allowed into his personal orbit. This withdrawal was not simply an effort to keep away photographers or avoid the demands of fame. It established the perfect conditions for vanishing. If fewer people were able to see him regularly, fewer people would be in a position to detect the substitution of another figure during his final weeks. The staff surrounding him during this period consisted almost entirely of longtime loyalists. These were not casual employees who came and went. They were men and women who had dedicated years, even decades, to guarding and serving Presley. Their devotion to him bordered on unquestioning loyalty. If Elvis had asked them to cooperate in an elaborate deception, there is every reason to believe they would have complied and kept their silence for the rest of their lives. Financial evidence from this same period adds another layer of intrigue. Records show patterns of significant cash withdrawals and transfers of assets into more liquid forms. These were not the transactions of a man resigned to an early death. Instead, they suggest a deliberate preparation for a new beginning elsewhere. Portable wealth is exactly what someone would require if planning to erase his public identity and quietly rebuild life under a different name. The renovation projects carried out at Graceland in those years are also telling. The estate saw the installation of advanced security systems and unusual communication equipment. These upgrades went far beyond the needs of an ordinary private residence. Secure telephone lines, encrypted communication devices, and surveillance networks capable of monitoring multiple sites were added to the property. For a celebrity expecting nothing more than adoring fans, such measures would have been excessive. But for a man preparing to vanish in a coordinated operation, they would have been indispensable. Medical records, limited though they are, provide yet another strand of evidence. Presley was in contact with physicians who specialized not only in routine treatments, but in cosmetic procedures and identity alteration. Officially, these consultations were explained as ordinary checkups or minor elective treatments. Yet the timing and nature of these visits aligned suspiciously well with the type of preparation required for a physical transformation. Altering appearance, even slightly, would have been a critical step in ensuring that Presley could disappear from the public eye without immediate recognition. Taken together, these details present a strikingly consistent picture. Elvis Presley was not simply retreating from fame in his final years. He was constructing the perfect environment, laying the financial groundwork, and consulting the right experts to prepare for the most remarkable disappearance ever attempted by a public figure. Fact 4. The international sightings pattern. The fourth mind-blowing fact emerges from the long and persistent pattern of Elvis Presley sightings that were reported across the world in the decades following his supposed death. These accounts are not simply the inventions of overzealous fans or the fantasies of impersonators. They are documented encounters that, when examined together, form a compelling and consistent pattern, The reports align in both time and geography in ways that suggest genuine movement rather than disconnected imagination. The earliest credible sightings began to surface approximately 2 years after the summer of 1977. They occurred most often in locations known for privacy and for communities that welcome expatriates. Argentina, Australia, and certain remote areas of the United States became recurring focal points. These places share common qualities. They offered relative anonymity, populations where English was widely spoken, and in some cases, limited extradition agreements with the United States. Each of these elements would have been ideal for a man attempting to live quietly without attracting official attention. What makes these sightings so difficult to dismiss is the remarkable consistency of the physical descriptions and behavioral details. Witnesses repeatedly described a man who matched Elvis's well-known height and build. Yet they also noticed subtle alterations in appearance that suggested cosmetic procedures had been performed. Despite these changes, the man's voice, gestures, and even his knowledge of personal experiences known only to Elvis remained consistent across unrelated testimonies. Such specific alignment of detail could not have been fabricated by ordinary onlookers seeking attention. Investigators hired by media outlets took many of these reports seriously. Over the years, they pursued dozens of claims. Most were eventually dismissed, but several investigations produced results that could not be easily explained away. Photographs surfaced that bore an uncanny resemblance. Audio recordings captured voices nearly indistinguishable from Elvis's own. Testimony from independent witnesses repeated the same phrases, quirks, and mannerisms. While none of this evidence alone could stand as conclusive proof, together it created a body of information too substantial to ignore. The timing of these encounters adds another layer to the mystery. Reports often surged around dates that held deep personal meaning in Elvis's life. His birthday, the anniversary of his supposed death, and other milestones regularly triggered spikes in sightings. This pattern suggested that whoever was being observed carried an intimate knowledge of Presley's personal calendar, rather than simply impersonating him at random moments. Even law enforcement agencies became involved when some reports raised concerns of fraud or identity misuse. On more than one occasion, investigators concluded that they could not definitively rule out the possibility that the individual in question was Elvis Presley himself. They could not prove it either, but the fact that experts were unable to dismiss him as a candidate underscores the seriousness with which some of these encounters were regarded. Over time, the geography of sightings shifted in a way that mirrors the natural course of aging. In the earlier decades, reports emerged from energetic cosmopolitan cities where life was fast and movement was constant. In later years, however, the stories came increasingly from smaller towns and more tranquil settings, the types of places sought by those entering their later years in search of peace. The progression matches precisely what might be expected if Elvis Presley had indeed lived on in secret. Fact 5. The music industry's greatest cover-up. The fifth and perhaps most shocking fact concerns the music industry's systematic suppression of evidence connected to the disappearance of Elvis Presley. Few realize the sheer scale of financial power tied to his name. Record labels, publishing houses, and entertainment corporations had billions of dollars invested in the continuation of the Elvis brand. The survival of that brand depended on one crucial element: that the world believed Elvis Presley was dead. A living Elvis would have thrown the entire industry into chaos. Ownership rights, royalty structures, and licensing agreements would have been challenged overnight. The corporate profits that flowed so freely after 1977 would have been jeopardized beyond measure. The speed of the industry's response after his supposed death was nothing short of extraordinary. Within days, there was an aggressive, coordinated rush to lock down his catalog, image rights, and every element of his intellectual property. This was not the slow process of estate management that follows most celebrity deaths. It was a sweeping campaign of legal maneuvering, executed with precision, as though rehearsed in advance. The thoroughness of this effort makes it difficult to believe it was spontaneous. It looked like a plan already waiting to be activated. Industry insiders have revealed that this protection of the Presley brand went far beyond contracts and copyrights. Journalists who dared to investigate stories suggesting Elvis might still be alive found themselves stonewalled. Access that had once been granted was suddenly denied. Sources who had been eager to talk quickly fell silent, some under subtle threats and pressure. Radio stations across the country reported receiving quiet instructions to avoid playing certain Elvis tracks rumored to contain coded messages. These were not casual decisions. They were deliberate acts of suppression designed to smother speculation before it could ignite. The pattern of posthumous releases only adds to the mystery. Year after year, albums, compilations, and unreleased material appeared with remarkable regularity. The quality of these records raised questions of its own. They did not sound like hastily assembled cash grabs. They carried the polish and authenticity of material overseen by someone who knew Elvis's standards intimately. It was as if the hand of Presley himself still hovered over the mixing boards, ensuring that his music was treated with the care he demanded in life. Even executives who had worked directly with Elvis during his last years later admitted their doubts. Some went on record saying outright that they believed his death had been staged. These were not fanatics or conspiracy theorists. They were seasoned professionals with everything to lose and nothing to gain. Their willingness to risk their reputation suggests they carried knowledge or suspicions too strong to ignore. The financial motive behind this suppression is undeniable. A living Elvis could demand renegotiations, higher royalties, and full creative control. A dead Elvis, however, belonged entirely to the corporations. Death silenced his ability to challenge the system. It turned him into the perfect product, endlessly profitable, forever compliant, and immune to contractual disputes. Technical analysis has added yet another layer of intrigue. Experts examining so-called posthumous recordings discovered anomalies pointing to more recent production dates. Equipment signatures, recording techniques, and even subtle background acoustics indicated tracks produced well after 1977. These are details nearly impossible to fake. If true, they suggest Elvis was not only alive after his supposed death, but still actively involved in shaping his music. The modern evidence technology reveals new clues. In the digital age, technology is uncovering forms of evidence that earlier generations of investigators could never have imagined. Tools once reserved for intelligence agencies are now available to researchers, and their findings cast new light on the mystery of Elvis Presley's supposed death. Digital enhancement of photographs from the scene at Graceland has revealed inconsistencies in both lighting and shadow. These anomalies are not subtle. They are dramatic differences that point to manipulation, strongly suggesting that the images were staged rather than naturally captured. Audio analysis has also been applied to recordings made at Graceland on the day Elvis was declared dead. Sophisticated software capable of measuring vocal stress patterns reveals results that conflict with the official story. The voices captured on tape do not display the markers of panic or crisis expected during a medical emergency. Instead, the patterns point to controlled speech, consistent with individuals following a predetermined script while attempting to sound distressed. Such evidence provides an objective counterpoint to the narrative offered in 1977. Modern facial recognition systems have been used to examine photographs tied to Elvis sightings across the last 4 decades. While the technology is limited by the quality of older images, it has eliminated countless false claims. More importantly, it has confirmed that several sightings involved men whose facial structure and bone measurements aligned with those of an aging Elvis Presley. Though not conclusive proof, the results strongly suggest that at least some of these accounts involved the real man, not impersonators. Cell phone data has added another strange dimension. Visitor location records from Graceland reveal unusual movement patterns during significant Presley anniversaries. Large groups of people have consistently gathered near areas of the estate not normally open to tourists. At the same time, security system logs show unexplained activations and alerts during these exact periods. These digital footprints imply continuing activity inside Graceland, activity inconsistent with the idea of it being merely a static museum to a man long dead. Analysts have identified accounts that reveal an unusually detailed knowledge of Elvis's personal habits, cultural tastes, and private jokes. These accounts cannot be traced to family members, biographers, or close associates. Their language and references mirror Presley's known manner of speech. While the evidence is circumstantial, the specificity of details suggests that the person behind some of these accounts may be more than a historian or enthusiast. Even the rapidly growing field of genetic genealogy has played a role. Public DNA databases have been searched for markers tied to Presley's family line. No definitive matches have yet been announced, but several partial matches have been discovered in unexpected geographic regions. These signatures hint at the possibility of descendants or relatives existing in places Presley was never officially known to visit during his lifetime. Together, these digital tools create a web of anomalies that cannot be easily dismissed. Far from closing the case, technology has opened it wider than ever before. The truth that changes everything. After decades of examining conflicting reports, unexplained anomalies, and mounting evidence, the picture that emerges is not of a tragic early death, but of one of the most extraordinary disappearing acts in human history. The combination of motive, means, and opportunity converged perfectly, creating the conditions for Elvis Presley to stage his own exit and begin a new life far from the suffocating pressures of global fame. The clues that remain are not trivial mistakes. The misspelled gravestone was not a careless oversight. It was a deliberate signal, a quiet message to those who knew how to interpret it. The inconsistencies surrounding the death certificate were not sloppy paperwork. They were the signs of a cover story carefully crafted to withstand casual scrutiny while masking the deeper truth. The witness protection links were not strange coincidences. They were the tools and necessities of a covert operation designed to relocate and safeguard one of the most recognizable figures in the world. The reports of Elvis sightings across multiple continents cannot be dismissed as the fever dreams of hopeful fans. The descriptions were consistent, the locations logical, and the timing significant. These were not random impersonators, but glimpses of a man who had chosen a quieter existence, finally tasting the ordinary life he had so often longed for. The music industry's aggressive maneuvers following his disappearance were not paranoid conspiracy theories. They were deliberate measures to protect billions of dollars tied to a brand that was worth more dead than alive. Each of these pieces of evidence might, on its own, be explained away as coincidence, rumor, or error. But when the fragments are assembled together, a clear pattern emerges. That pattern leads to a conclusion both startling and inevitable. Elvis Aaron Presley did not die on August 16, 1977. He escaped from the gilded prison of fame, trading the endless roar of adoration for the priceless gift of freedom. Modern technology has sharpened this picture in ways unimaginable to investigators of the past. Digital enhancement has exposed inconsistencies in photographs once accepted as authentic. Voice stress analysis has revealed recordings that follow scripts rather than emergencies. Facial recognition software has identified striking consistencies in sightings once written off as fantasy. Data tracking and pattern recognition have shown unexplained activity at Graceland long after the supposed death. These tools have transformed what was once speculation into something closer to forensic investigation. If Elvis Presley is still alive today, he would now be approaching 90 years of age. That would mean he has spent nearly half a century living in the quiet anonymity he once craved. If true, he succeeded in achieving what countless other stars could only dream of: the ability to walk away from fame without ever being dragged back into its crushing spotlight. The truth may never be publicly confirmed, yet the evidence points toward a haunting conclusion. The king did not die. He simply walked off stage and left the building forever. The evidence we've uncovered today turns the official story upside down. 5 explosive facts, each one more shocking than the last, reveal a carefully orchestrated disappearance rather than a tragic ending. From the misspelled gravestone to the suspicious death certificate, from government ties to global sightings, and even the music industry's billion-dollar cover-up, the clues form a pattern too precise to ignore. The king may not have died, he may have walked away. But here's the catch. This is only the beginning. What hidden files still lie locked away in government archives? What secrets echo in the vaults of Graceland? And most of all, what evidence has the world not yet seen? If this rocked your view of history, hit subscribe and ring the bell. Share this video because the truth must be heard.